Hello and welcome to my new series that I am titling Marxist Propaganda, where I plan on chronicling as many Marx Brothers films as I can realistically do until the pandemic is over. Given that I have a lot of time to spend at home during this pandemic, I imagine that I'll probably be rewatching and reviewing all of them. The only exception will be Love Happy, because I was actually working on a proper review for how to fix it before this whole thing started, so we'll do that one as the first video after all this clears up once I can film it. But for now, I'd like to go back to the beginning. In 1887, Minnie Marx gave birth to a son named Leonard, who would later go on to be called Chico and... No, I suppose we don't need to go that far back. I think I'd be willing to settle for starting with their first film. Already an established vaudeville act by the mid-1920s, the Marx Brothers signed a contract with Paramount Pictures to bring their act to the silver screen. Since the talkies were becoming the hot new thing, and if there's one thing the Marx Brothers could do, it was talk. Well, most of them anyway. In case you need a refresher course on who the brothers are, I'll go over them in quick succession. First, you have Zeppo Marx, who was only a part of the group until 1933, when he left acting to go into show business management, and became a theatrical agent, representing his brothers among other many clients. The other three remained active for their entire film career together, with you having Chico, who spoke in a hammy Italian accent that makes Walter Koenig's Russian accent from Star Trek look subdued, Harpo Marx, the mute, who spoke only through honking a horn and miming, and of course the most famous of the group, Groucho Marx, famous for his grease paint mustache and eyebrows and sharp wit. If you recognize any of them just on sight, it's probably Groucho. You might also remember him as the namesake of those novelty glasses that everyone had in their birthday party bags when I was a kid. And to tie everything back into MASH, because it seems like everything in my life does, Groucho's acting style was the inspiration for both Elliot Gould's performance as Trapper John McIntyre in Robert Altman's 1970 MASH film, and Alan Alda's Hawkeye Pierce from the MASH TV series. How about that? Technically, their first film with Paramount was a silent short named Humor Risk, but it was never released, so we'll have to settle for discussing their first released film, The Cocoanuts, released in 1929, and was, like their next film, Animal Crackers would also be, an adaptation of one of their Broadway shows. The film serves as the first on-screen appearances for several of the Marx Brothers staples, Groucho playing a person in a position of power, usually the manager of something, Chico and Harpo stumbling into the plot as kleptos, and Zeppo as someone close to Groucho. Rounding off the cast staples is Margaret Dumont, taking her place as the wealthy dowager that Groucho tries to woo. The other roles, the young lovers and the bad guys, would rotate in and out, only sometimes featuring the same actor returning between movies. I would also be remiss if I didn't mention that both The Cocoanuts and Animal Crackers were practically filmed in my backyard at Astoria Studios in Queens. I mean, it's 2 trains, but still, New York pride. One thing that always gets me about old movies is how the musical numbers, especially the dance sequences, are never woven into the story. They just sort of happen, and in the rare case that they are in the story, it's the characters watching a show. I guess because it happened in theater it was more common back then, but for me, it's always my cue to tune out for a few minutes and check my phone. Though this film is unique in that the musical numbers were shot live with an off-camera orchestra. And people said the 2012 Les Miserables film was the first movie to do it. Gotta give credit to those early pioneers. The film revolves around Groucho playing Mr. Hammer, the owner of a hotel in Florida during the Florida land boom, but the hotel is struggling, with Hammer forced to completely BS and distract his staff in order to convince them not to revolt because he hasn't paid them in weeks. Ah, I see he's using the Dirk Gently employment method, though his staff is far more even-tempered than Janice ever was. Just look at how happy they are. Seems to me like they're listening to the teachings of the wrong Marx here. Also at the hotel are two con artists, Harvey Yates and Penelope, who discuss a wealthy dowager, Mrs. Potter, played by Margaret Dumont, of course, and her daughter Polly. They scheme to steal Mrs. Potter's diamond necklace and get rid of Polly's other suitor, Bob Adams, so that Harvey can pay his debts and steal the fortune by marrying Polly. Meanwhile, Polly and Bob are sitting on the beach and discussing real estate development, since Bob is a struggling architect who wants to develop a resort on the beach that will entirely reinvent the area. After a musical number,
and I'll be smiling through when my dream comes true.
Harvey and Penelope send Polly looking for her mother and unsuccessfully try to intimidate Bob, but he's so easygoing and pie in the sky that it doesn't even register. Mrs. Potter complains to her daughter about Polly running around with Bob instead of Yates, since his cover story makes him out to be a wealthy socialite from a good family. Zeppo, playing Jameson, the desk clerk, sleeps at the desk as Hammer comes by to try to get Mrs. Potter to invest in the hotel, but he gets a tad sidetracked.
Do you know that Florida is the greatest state in the Union?
Is it?
Take its climate. No, we took that. Take its fruits. Take the alligator pear. Take all the alligator pears and keep them. See if I care.
The important thing to know about Marx Brothers movies is that, especially in the early years, the plot was usually thinner than tissue paper and was really just a vehicle for Groucho and the gang to go off of for their gags.
Hello? Yes? Ice water in 318? Is that so? Where'd you get it? Oh, you want some? Oh, that's different. Have you got any ice? No, I haven't. This is Coconut Beach. No snow, no ice.
Next up, Chico and Harpo show up with an empty suitcase, and they have a slapstick bit that goes on for quite some time that includes Harpo eating increasingly odd things.
Now, I'm in a position, gentlemen, where... He's hungry. Here, have one of these flowers. They're buckwheat. Pick out a nice one now. I don't want you to get any of the waste of it. There you are. I'm so glad.
See what I meant about paper-thin plot? It culminates in a pretty sexist scene of Harpo chasing some female bellhops, which is unfortunately very common in these films. Though, much like the mutinous, that's just the character. Apparently the real Harpo was among the most chaste of the brothers in real life, being a devoted family man. The villains scheme in the lobby, and Harpo and Chico get in some fun slapstick, which inspires Penelope to use them as patsies when the necklace goes missing. Chico and Harpo are also seized upon by a detective who finds them suspicious. But how could he think that Chico and Harpo were thieves?
Martin, can you tell me what time is the next train to Philadelphia? Train there once a week, sometimes twice a day. Thank you. That's all right. That's fine. It's a little tight. Needs something taken out. All right, keep it. That's just what I need.
Huh. Strangely enough, we get a sequence of Harpo playing an instrument, but instead of a harp, it's instead a clarinet. This was in the early days of the group when he was called Clarinetto Marx. The name didn't stick, though. Hammer flirts a bit with Mrs. Potter, and we finally get to see Harpo playing the harp. I told you it didn't stick. It barely made it 2 scenes before he went back to the harp. That night, Harpo sneaks into Penelope's room as Harvey comes in with Mrs. Potter's keys that he stole from her. Harpo hides as Harvey instructs Penelope where to hide the necklace so it won't be found in their rooms if a search is made. Unfortunately for her, Hammer is currently sneaking into Mrs. Potter's room, and Chico shows up in Penelope's. The trio of Marx Brothers go from room to room with Chico and Harpo sneaking around, evading Hammer at every turn. Mrs. Potter returns to her room and chases Harpo away before Hammer shows up and hides in the closet. Then the detective shows up and sits in Penelope's room as she steals the necklace after everyone else has left and returns to her room only to be surprised by Harpo popping out from under the covers. Hammer invites Chico to the auction as a plant to sell the lots of the manor. This is the inception of another classic Marx Brothers gag, which is Groucho and Chico doing wordplay, which shows up in several of their other films, most notably in the Sanity Clause segment of A Night at the Opera.
You know what an auction is, huh?
I come from Italy on the Atlantic auction.
You know what a lot is?
Yeah, it's too much.
I don't mean a whole lot, just a little lot with nothing on it. Now, over here, on this site, we're going to build an eye and ear hospital. This is going to be a site for sore eyes. And here is a viaduct leading over to the mainland.
All right, viaduct.
I'm not playing Ask Me Another. I say that's a viaduct.
All right, viaduct. It's what that viaduct. Why you no chicken?
Before the auction, Polly sings a song which, while a good song, isn't necessarily one of my favorites. At the auction, Chico naturally ruins it.
Now, what am I offer for this lot? Anything at all? Anything at all? $200. Ah, the gentleman bids $200. Who'll pay $300? $300. Another gentleman says $300. Do I hear $400? Well, the auction is practically over.
Bob decides to bid on a lot, and it really gets going until Harpo knocks out one of the other bidders. But that's okay, because it helps Bob win the lot. The necklace plot restarts when Mrs. Potter comes in and explains her problem, and institutes a $1,000 reward. The detective takes it upon himself to investigate the crime, but Harpo manages to solve the crime almost immediately, and locates the necklace in the tree stump where Yates stashed it, since, as I mentioned before, he had been in the room when Harvey gave Penelope the directions. But no good deed goes unpunished, and the detective fingers Harpo as the culprit who stole it. But Harvey instead points the blame at Bob, and Penelope corroborates Harvey's fake story about Bob as the thief. Bob protests, but no one in the crowd apart from Polly will stand up for him. Mrs. Potter believes it, which means that Polly is unfortunately forbidden from ever seeing Bob again. The detective takes Bob away for questioning, and Mrs. Potter decides to have a quick shotgun wedding and marry off Polly to Harvey, which is bad news for Polly, but great news for Hammer, because it means a dinner party in his dining room, which he charges extra for.
You may invite everyone.
It's 50 with Jell-O, and oh, how you can Jell-O.
Chico and Harpo spring into action to get Bob out of jail. After some more slapstick, they rush to the hotel, and Harpo provides Bob with evidence that proves that he didn't commit the crime, the envelope that Harvey wrote the directions on for Penelope. At the engagement party, Harpo steals the detective's shirt, which, for some unexplained reason, becomes a major musical number, set to the music from the opera Carmen. I really can't think of any intelligent analysis for that, so enjoy this clip. Hammer gives a wedding speech.
And that, of course, reminds me of the story of the Irishman.
Man, I knew that film was popular, but I had no idea that it was so popular it could transcend time. Before the engagement is official, though, Bob manages to get the map to Polly, and she reveals that Harvey was the true necklace culprit. Yates and Penelope escape, only to be caught by the detective, and the tycoon that Bob was courting for his real estate development dreams has arrived and wants to not only finance the development of the resort, but also wants to book several rooms in the hotel. Mrs. Potter apologizes to Bob, and in her apology, she revises the wedding plans and allows Bob and Polly to marry. And the movie's over. As you'll see, the Marx Brothers movies are very light on resolution. So, what's my verdict on the Cocoanuts? As their first outing on the screen, it's pretty good, even if it's not nearly as memorable for me as their later catalog is. Frankly, before I did this rewatch, I didn't really remember much about the film, and remembered finding it sort of boring. The gags are great, and in this rewatch I rediscovered a bunch of gags I'd forgotten about that made me laugh out loud, but the songs aren't really anything to write home about, despite the interesting way that they were recorded. That might also be because, unlike many of the other films, Groucho doesn't get to show off his pipes, which is always a treat. I'll go more into that when we get to Animal Crackers. There's also something to be said about the cinematography, mainly that because this was made in the very early days of sound film, they needed to keep the camera's motor quiet, so we get this mostly static shot of every scene of the movie because the camera is stuck in this soundproof box. It's definitely one I'd recommend, but maybe start with one of their later films if you want something a bit more solid and memorable. I think I'm going to do a ranking system for these, just so we have a baseline for how much I enjoyed each film. I give the Cocoanuts 3 out of 5 Marx Brothers. This is also a good time to bring up that, yes, there were 5 Marx Brothers. That one at the start there is Gummo, who left the vaudeville actor in World War I, so that's why I didn't mention him earlier. The Cocoanuts is an average Marx Brothers films. It has the zaniness and all the elements are there, but it's not nearly as memorable as their later entries would be. And it serves as a good benchmark for all the qualities that a good Marx Brothers film has, even if I don't consider it their best work. Next time, I'll be taking a trip to the jungle so that we can follow the adventures of the good Captain Spaulding in 1930s Animal Crackers. See you then.